Howdy, howdy. So how do you go from a camper van into an expedition camper? It starts with design, and we're going to get in that today, and it's going to be a big one. So get in there, grab a drink, and sit down and enjoy. And certainly thank you for subscribing and watching. So let's start in my design studio with what am I building? It's first of all mostly a mobile home and a gear garage with all the gear inside. Ability to carry 6 bikes, easy in and out of those bikes, as well as 6 pairs of skis, easy in and out of them as well. An inflatable paddleboard and kayak, at least one of each, and other outdoor gear. The intent is to be able to travel this full time and be able to sleep 2 people full time, but support additional 2 and always have a bed set up ready to go. And also an ability to additionally sleep 2 more people should and when that be needed, and also be able to seat 4 people in the dinette for eating, and have a pass-through in between the cab and the camper, and ideally a very small pass-through at least between the camper and also the gear garage. To have a full kitchen with lots of water and food ability for several weeks for those 2 people, all ability to cook and make food, and certainly even clean clothes and do washing of those clothes and extended travel, and after doing outdoor workouts and sweaty runs and bike rides to make sure I'm not traveling around with dirty, smelly clothes. And speaking of that, we also need a shower, certainly a full stand-up shower, a toilet, hot water, and also this camper needs to be all season, as it's intended to be traveled in really any climate, and so therefore no soft walls. I seriously consider doing a lifting roof with hard walls, but that was a lot of complication for my very first camper, so I went away from that. And also trying to keep the total length down to about at 21 to 22 feet or no longer than that, and also a wheelbase of less than about 150 inches. If you haven't seen my video on my chassis comparison, please do watch that. But certainly we're going to get into all these different layouts and why I chose these layouts and about the design. Hopefully you'll learn something from it and you'll understand more about what I'm planning to build. For those of you that have been watching my videos for a while now, you probably watched my chassis selection video and where I spoke about why I chose the chassis that I did, the Mitsubishi Fuso with a 4-wheel drive conversion by EarthCruiser. And also my explanation of the different criteria that I was analyzing in doing this. And I shared with you this spreadsheet that I'm showing you right now, which included many different factors, including weighting and rankings and all these different specifications for these different vehicles that I was considering, and calculated weights and finished heights and certainly widths and all those different things and off-road capabilities and so forth. I've also offered to share this spreadsheet if you go ahead and just subscribe to my website, VanTripping.com, and it should automatically send you an invitation to review this. That is my chassis selection, which ultimately led to, of course, the layouts of the campers to see what would actually work best with the chassis that I had selected. And this all started really in earnest with some hand sketches back in 2019 of really what I was looking for and the different layouts and so forth. And to really lay this out pretty clearly, it really expanded. Again, these are really rough sketches of different layouts and things that I wanted, and even went into some elevations of the different sides and probably what that would look like. And as you can see here in these elevations, this is actually as a cab over type of design on the camper here, because I was originally considering the chassis would be a full-size pickup truck, but a single cab, not a dual cab, since I don't need a dual cab. And I wanted as short a wheelbase as possible to accommodate the camper size I wanted. So hence where I had this small cab over alcove or storage area, not big enough to sleep in because I didn't want to add the additional height and length when it wasn't really on a larger chassis to accommodate that. But nonetheless, I went through these different sketches, different options. One of the things I really liked early on, and that was really an entry and bathroom being combined. Both spaces that aren't used necessarily all the time, but I really like the idea of an entry mudroom and a vestibule, essentially an airlock to keep the hot or cold air from outside to come into the camper, or at least minimize the quantity of that. And of course, be able to brush and shake off wet and muddy clothes inside a bathroom where it was already easy to wash out. And so that was one of the things I really quickly early on recognized that I did want, that was important to me. I also did do some things like adding some storage above the cab, as I mentioned, just to provide some additional space there depending on the chassis that was selected. But then also went and laid out some plumbing and some electrical and even solar panels panels on the roof, just some basic components, just helped me understand where these different components would be located, their position on the vehicle, and the space they would take up to really give me what I wanted from them. Now those are pretty all crude sketches, so I quickly moved over to CAD. It really helped me to iterate and come up with many different drawings, as you can see here. And some of those were some pretty traditional designs. Again, this little storage alcove above a regular cab full-size truck. Another key thing that I really started with early on, in addition to the entryway that was an enclosed vestibule with doors that could swing to enclose both the shower space and also the toilet space, but also create an airlock, was also a large gear garage. This was obviously a very key criteria for me. And another thing I wanted too is water and batteries and things like that, all that weight down low. So making sure I got them down low in these different drawings here. And like I said, some of these are pretty traditional designs. On this previous design, I did actually put a recess in for a spare tire back here into the squared in departure angle. And I realized that made a lot of sense in that I actually got more bed space, another 1 to 1.5 feet of bed space, but no longer of a total length of camper, which was pretty important to me. So I really like that design. At the same time, I didn't know quite what chassis I was going with yet, and I was still considering a Unimog as a chassis, which generally are 42 or 44 inch diameter tires. And so those really were a little harder to fit underneath a bed, even though this bed is fairly high up to accommodate the bikes and other gear that will go into this gear garage. I still had to mount this tire pretty high up on the rear wall. You also notice too that instead of stairs coming outward, they actually go forward. And the reason why is because stairs are generally about 20 to 24 inches wide. And so these stairs can actually be expanded, slide out and expanded forward, and only really take up 24 inches along the side of the vehicle. So I could be in a parking lot at a grocery store and still get into the camper to load groceries, right? As an example, with a car parked right next to me. Whereas if stairs go out, they're going to take up probably somewhere between 4 and up to 6 feet going out. And so you can't have a car parked next to you, or if there is, or a tree or a rock out there, then you really can't easily go in and out, and I didn't like that layout. So I iterated on some different variations of this design and some of the different cabinets and so forth, and even some different spare tire configurations on the back wall, whether it's 2 or 1, and just kept moving forward on these different designs here. And you can see here's really would be a Unimog with a single large 42-inch tire, even into a square departure angle here at the back and recessed into that. And so again, whatever that width of the tire is, in this case roughly 13 inches, this bed platform or camper space on the upper portion here can be expanded at least a width of that tire, and that gains a lot of additional space inside. So I really like that. I also played with some different ideas of windows on the back wall, and of course here a rotating down spare tire carrier. And so I kept building upon these different designs, and even of course iterating quite a bit on some of the different designs and floor plans and different layouts, and pretty traditional layouts here with a bed that's really in an east-west configuration, and so whoever slept in the further rearmost position would have to roll over the other person, which in the middle of the night or when you're trying to get out of bed early in the morning to cook some breakfast or get coffee or just get up and read. And so I didn't really like that configuration, but nonetheless I just kind of played with some different layouts here and traditional more layouts of the dinette and different sides of them, and quickly came to some realizations of things that I liked and didn't like with this layout and the compromises that each one of them did provide. So one of the things also that I went ahead and did after I started to zero in on a chassis of choice, which was really the Mitsubishi Fuso Canter or the Isuzu NPR in a 4-wheel drive, I went ahead and got their bodybuilder's guide, read through it entirety, all 200 and, or in this case 376 pages for this one, and I've read through this 376 pages many times, and so I got familiar with, most importantly, their dimensions. And you can see here these dimensions I have up. This is on a 134-inch wheelbase, which is actually what I have as well. But one of the things I didn't realize early on is that EarthCruiser, who I did end up choosing to build the 4-wheel drive system for this chassis for me, does make a frame extension on the back, and that does add additional length. And so before I realized that, and also before I decided to have them build the chassis for me in 4-wheel drive, I was only designing out the camper to essentially the end of the chassis rails here, plus really the width or depth of the bumper. And so I had a little bit shorter campers that I started with. Then I realized I could extend them with a frame frame extension or like what EarthCruiser does. And so I played with some different layouts, and again, very similar layouts, still the bed in an east to west configuration, but yet a longer kitchen and dinette with this extended layout and or a larger bathroom. And I played with some different layouts here to see all the different pros and cons of things being laid out differently, and window placements and things like that. Here I actually put a window to the rear, which I really liked, that had a lot of really nice benefits to having a window in the back, and later kind of kept to taking some of these things away and bringing them back again. One of the things also, as I started getting into these more detailed layouts of each of these different things, is I wanted to make sure I was getting my dimensions for different things accurate. And so with these different iterations, you can see I have stoves and sinks and of course toilets and even a washer dryer, as that was a consideration or a key criteria for me, to be able to wash clothes while on extended trips, and especially when working out mountain biking, getting dirty, dusty, and sweaty. Want to make sure you're able to clean those clothes. You don't want to be lugging around a whole bunch of smelly, dirty clothes for a long period of time. So one of the things that was really important to me too in my spreadsheet here was to really make sure I had dimensions for all the different components that I was looking at using. So everywhere from solar panels that be on the roof to batteries and inverters, as you can see here, and looking at all these different dimensions of things and other electronics, even things like traction boards go in the back, the dimensions of different winches and expanded fuel tanks, water systems, a different tank that I was looking or considering with using, hot water systems, toilets, even things such as shower traps and how much height would they add, fridges and microwaves and toaster ovens and all these different things, heaters, and then also even all the legal requirements of just how far can you extend things back, rear bumper or past the rear axle, and heights of things like that. So this was incredibly helpful to have all these dimensions up to make sure that I could incorporate all of them into my different drawings and designs that I had here, so that I can really consider what really worked well for each one of these. And also things like changing out door swings. In some of these here, you see the door swings actually go away, which saves a tremendous amount of space inside by not having swinging doors inside, going to a sliding door. And so that sliding door was a tremendous benefit, both for the pass-through as well as for the bathroom door or from the main camper space. And so moving on to some of these other ones, I kept moving through, trying to understand really the weight balance, if different weights were different places, be the appliances, the batteries, and the water system, things like that. Also like the ease of access into the bed. I didn't really like the steps because they took up space, even though that step space can be used for other things. But nonetheless, I didn't really like that. But also like the ease of getting into bed, how quiet it would be in bed, being next to a fridge, or somebody got up in the morning to make some toast and being next to the toaster, or microwave. Would that be noisy and disturbing if the other person was still in bed? So I was trying to think about all this stuff. And also, if one person wanted to get out of bed and go sit and have some coffee and read in the dinette while the other person was sleeping in a little bit, what would that be like if they had to turn some lights on and make some noise in the kitchen and things of that nature? So I was trying to think through all these different things in each one of my iterations, and that really helped to keep furthering this design a little more. In this design here too, this was actually for a Unimog. It's slightly different, both wheelbase and camper size. But one of the things I worked on was also this sliding bed. And this was really kind of somewhat of a revelation, in that this sliding bed, I say slide out, but it also could tilt up at the back here to get it out of the way during the day, but just simply electrically, just push a button, it would slide right out into its lowered space, or just release some drawer slides to let it slide out. And it would go over the dinette and over the kitchen. And of course, going over the kitchen, there was a problem with, well, what if the sink faucet's in the way and it bumps into that, or there's something on the kitchen counter that's in the way, or if somebody else is sleeping in the dinette, even though the dinette would be much lower than it in position, just what would it be like getting out? And then I had to come up with these stairs or way to get up on the bed. For that purpose, was somebody who was in the dinette, didn't want to wake them up or disturb them, so these slide out stairs from the bottom of the bed platform. But it was still really a great idea. I just really liked it a lot as far as some of the benefits that it gained. But I was still struggling a bit with some of these other issues. So the retractable or slide out bed and the retractable stairs was certainly a good option that came up. There was a couple of options that I played with, both for a Unimog as well as for an NPR or a Zuzu chassis, or also another chassis. And one of the things, like with the Unimog chassis, it isn't that you can't accommodate quite as long of a camper. Only about a 13-foot long camper on a Unimog chassis compared on a long wheelbase Unimog chassis compared to the Zuzu NPR, really up to as much as about 16 feet off the back on the upper portion here over the spare tire and over the bumper. So I designed a lowering gearbox that could have bikes and other outdoor gear essentially attached to the rear wall here. It could electrically lower down to the ground for loading and unloading of that gear, and then raise right back up to be flush with the ceiling of the camper, and thus have it about 4 to 5 feet off the ground. And so what some of those dimensions would be and all those things, I kind of played with those and some other iterations of design here. You can see this is really where I started to play with the comparisons of an east-west versus a north-south bed configuration, and really quickly realized I really like that layout, and then thought, let me also try one with, instead of a dinette on the side, a dinette at the rear. And that was another revelation in a couple of ways, in that the dinette could be quite a bit wider. So whereas if it's on the side, it can only really be about 36 inches in width, which is pretty narrow for 4 people to sit there, but it can certainly be accommodated. Whereas if it's on the back here, it can be a little bit longer and certainly also wider across, which can make it much more spacious. Now, granted, that also takes away quite a bit of kitchen space. And so how do you really leverage this kitchen space here? And so those were some of the things I played with in my subsequent designs and kept building upon those, not only kind of changing out from these side dinettes here, but looking at those from this east-west bed configuration to the north-south bed configuration, and some rear dinettes and how to manage that and how does that really compare with these different ones. And then also this rear departure angle and how could that work with this spare tire in there, with a little more specifics in there. So again, I played with this fold-up bed and some of the issues and stuff that had and how this would work as far as proportions. I really like that bed setup. It did allow a lot of benefits in that it could also work as a day bed when it was folded on the back end, folded up against the back wall, where someone could lean up against there and be used as a day bed or as a reading bed. And so I worked with different movements and how to raise and lower this platform, from linear actuators that slid out to track actuators and other ways to move this up and down very easily. I still didn't like the ladder being in the way, so I kept kind of playing with some of these different variations. And with the dinettes here, I felt like on the side, I felt like it needed a slide out ladder platform, which I again didn't really like. It takes up a lot of space, it's kind of a lot of weight. So I really like the rear dinette for the bed being able to slide over it and being able to step on the dinette to get up into bed. But it also reduced some of the kitchen space, and I like cook most of my own meals, and so that really changed kind of some of the benefits of how that kitchen would lay out. So I kept building upon this just a little bit more and kept coming up with some really different design options and just kept iterating and playing with these and seeing what some of the benefits were. And then really what I did also is move into actually adding in different electrical system and water system components, just generalizations of where they would be. So water tanks and hot water and batteries and other electrical system components and stuff under the dinette, and how that would really deal with weight, and not only the weight of those systems, but also the appliances. So if a fridge and or washer and dryer on the same size, would that throw off the weight, and how much so would it throw off the weight? So I really went ahead and worked with some of those different things so that I could make sure that I could have not only really ideally a perfect weight balance from side to side, but also a pretty perfect weight balance from front to rear, say perfect as far as the proportion of that. And to show you a little bit, even just to give you a sense of just how much I look into this, I even go through and essentially calculate out the weight of all these different components, where they will be not just from side to side, front to back, but also their height. And then I go and calculate out things like proportion of weight from side to side, front to rear, and even a center of gravity. And to me, it's an important thing to do in any camper, particularly one that's going to be used in any sort of off-road conditions, to make sure that that camper is balanced and it drives well. The steering has a good feel to it. It doesn't list or lean to one side or get pulled to one side with the crown of the road or with winds or things like that. So I kept exploring these weight distributions at different places to make sure that they were balanced, and of course playing with these different designs and really seeing the pros and cons of how they'd work out, and then just kept building upon this a little bit, starting then to add in actual dimensions of water systems and some of the electrical systems into the camper, into these different dimensions. and really just continue to build upon some of the different bathroom variations of how a sink could slide out or a toilet could slide out, and so it could be out of the way to really have a nice big shower and not really be walking into a bathroom with an exposed toilet when walking into that bathroom. And so you can see I played with some different variations of where that toilet could be and how that changes things, and movement also of where the washer and dryer would be, and kind of the benefits of this. If something broke, like a toilet slide broke or something, would that cause an issue getting through? Or if somebody needed to get through to the pass through, how would that be crawling through and making that accommodation? I definitely explored a couple of things as well here, in that also explored a two-way sliding table. I didn't like how tight it was to get in around these kitchen counters into the dinette benches. And even though the dinette is raised up on a platform above both the electrical system and also most of the water system, I still felt like that'd be a little uncomfortable. So I put these angle wings on it and then a fold down on the front. And then I thought, well, I could also have this table slide sideways to slide out of the way and then back towards the middle again. And so different things like that to kind of get it out of the way when getting into a bench to sit down and enjoy a meal. And so I kept exploring those things, and so again, some different iterations of these designs. And then again, even kind of moving on a little bit to having, whether water tanks were on the sides or in the middle, an electrical system in the middle or on the sides, how that would deal with weight distribution, how that would deal with weight distribution when water tanks were loaded or unloaded. In this case, having shallow but yet long water tanks to really distribute that weight around, and you use the very bottom of the cabinets, which is not really very useful space anyways for the water tanks and some of the other systems. And by doing that, what would the effect of that be on weight and center of gravity? And then again, also a really shallow big water tank under the entire dinette with batteries and electrical systems stacked on top of that really shallow water tank there. And what would that do for, again, all the weight distributions and everything else as this was full or not full of water? Building on a little more details in here with this shallow water tank, and just continue to kind of play on some different variations here, which you can see I have many variations that I play with, and this is only probably about half of them. There are many more, and I created different generations of variations. This is just simply one generation of them right here. And I'd always play a little bit too with departure angles, and I'll do a little more explanation of that here in a bit to kind of go over that in a little more detail. But I always took a look at that too, and all these different variations of different layouts and what kind of effects would that have on everything. As I also started narrowing down to the Fuso chassis, I started narrowing down my dimensions, getting them much more precise so that they were very precise as far as where the axle would be. The rear axle, I really wanted this weight over the rear axle. But even so, with my camper layout, because of this big gear garage in the back, which is literally loaded mostly with just things like bikes, which don't weigh very much at all, there's very little weight behind the rear axle. It's pretty much just a bed and a bunch of bikes. And so the weight here, I wanted as much as weight to the back as possible so that I could make sure I had this properly balanced. And so I kept focusing on those things, honing those things out, getting these more exact dimensions of different components and so forth that were in here, and building on that with a little bit of changes in the appliances, again, to get the layouts. Adding, in this case, also air conditioning and heating systems. That's what's designated by these little red arrows, and also the blue arrows for air conditioning system, where those vents would be and how they'd blow out and where they blow out, and of course thinking about through the ducting and things of that nature as well. So there's a lot of detail, a lot of thought. I also came back to this window in the rear wall, which I really liked, instead of having another window in the kitchen here, even though it's really nice to have a window in the kitchen to be able to look out when you're doing meal prep and cooking. I felt like it wouldn't be as useful or used as much and or as valuable from both a ventilation and a light perspective than having a window on a third wall instead of just windows on the two side walls. And so by having a window on the rear wall, it's another place for ventilation to come in for catching a prevailing breeze, or also light for where the light is or isn't and where you want it to be coming in from. And also just to see out the back, another perspective of not just views, but also to be able to look around, and so any needs or benefits that would provide. And then of course I played with some of these elevations, and just to see how the garage space work out, make sure that it'd be adequate for the space that I needed, which I of course calced out that with quite a bit of detail by measuring out my bikes and other gear and measuring out different variations of how they could go in here, and then of course looking at departure angles and so forth and what this would really amount to. And so moving on a little bit more, some different variations of the design. The bathroom was one of the areas you can see I keep changing here, mostly keep changing just to kind of keep trying out some different things and really see what would work well. I also went to here what I call my wide and long camper. I extended the width of the camper. I played with different widths of the external width from 78 to 80 to 82 to 84 inches. The Fuso cab is actually just over 80 inches wide, but by the time you add a couple little things on the outside of it, it comes out to be just under 82 inches wide. I really thought I should just probably stay with that width at 82 inches. That's a really nice width, but I also contemplated 80 inches to have that camper external width be really just the same or less than the cab itself. But there was a lot of benefits to going a little bit wider. So here I played with even, what if I go 2 inches wider? So it only sticks out roughly 2 inches on each side, depending on where you measure that cab. And so I played with that, the benefits I'd get. And then also, this is what I call my long version, where I also extended the camper by about 6 inches to see what that would gain me by this additional 6 inches over the rear here, which is really over the spare tire and over the rear bumper, just to see what that gains me. And I ended up kind of really narrowing down on somewhat of a more or less pretty close to my final design, which is getting the window dimensions exactly accurate for the windows that I had ordered and in really the exact places. Same for adding in the skylights over the rear bed and also over the shower and where I thought would be best to place those. I did not put the front smaller skylight centered over this entire camper because this isn't just all a big cabinet here. And so if it were centered, it'd be this purple line here, which would be really close up against this cabinet and wouldn't really bring light over the sink and distribute evenly over the bathroom space, which is this space here. So I played with some of those things, again, a little bit of sink and toilet layouts and how those would slide back, made sure all my weights were balanced and got my dimensions and lengths pretty right on for what I felt was a pretty perfect length to maximize the length for this chassis without having any sort of excessive overhang that was within all the legal requirements, and also at a good departure angle as well. I also kept building a little bit on this by playing a little bit more with the day bed and how that would go up and down, thinking about the kitchen space and how that would work for actually kitchen prep and use of the different appliances, and making sure that somebody could get out of bed, make some breakfast, sit in the dinette and use the dinette on either side here, read a book or something else while having some morning coffee or breakfast while the other person was sleeping in, or even be able to go use the bathroom and have that be convenient and easy, and sort of while also in bed with heads all the way back here, not hearing things like the fridge all the way far forward here, right? Or even a toilet flushing. And so not disturbing the person that's still sleeping in. I also really developed this sliding table option. I talked about the slide sideways table option, and I really am developing really what would be better would be a table that slides out from underneath the bed and really use just add a couple inches of height to the bed platform, or not the platform itself, but the mattress height. But by adding just a couple inches to the bed height, I could then get the dinette table completely out of the way. So now this whole dinette bench could actually have reclining benches that could recline down for a casual, comfortable mode, or a sleeping mode, or even just a movie watching mode, or recline all the way flat for another person to be able to sleep in there and make it really comfortable. But then they could also recline back up to get to the right level and be both out of the way, in position for having a meal, but the table being out of the way for getting in and out of the bed, and of course in and out of the dinette as well. So I played with all these different things and kind of worked out how they would work. Getting a little bit to different options as far as spare tires, this was one of the early designs I'd worked on, with really putting a spare tire inside the bike garage on the side. This will be with bikes coming out the rear door on the rear wall here, and that worked moderately well. But boy, it'd be really challenging to get that spare tire out. It would certainly take some time and a little bit of cleaning stuff out of the garage to get the spare tire out, and then of course a lift to lower it down, some kind of hoist to swing out to be able to lower that heavy spare tire down to the ground. So I played with that. I also went ahead and played with this departure angle most typically seen on campers, and I really came to the conclusion that by doing this, You might get slightly better departure angle, probably not, because you still have a bumper that sits in here, and that bumper, because of where it sits, isn't really making this departure angle any better. And now that spare tire is being hung really high up on this wall, so it raises center of gravity. It obviously raises that weight up there, and then of course makes it a little more challenging and dangerous for lowering that spare tire down to the ground or raising it back up, and add structure that has to be added up here to be able to support that spare tire. So I wasn't really very fond of that, and realized too that in some of the iterations I worked on here, this was for a Unimog actually chassis with the 42-inch tire, that again, having a 300-pound plus tire hanging up here was pretty uncomfortable to have to then lower that back down to the ground when needed. I really preferred the gear garage I talked about earlier that would just lower right down to the ground electrically and lower it back up, and the spare tire could be placed on the bottom of this, and it could still have a reasonable departure angle with the spare tire placed on the bottom of this gearbox. That didn't really work for the Fuso NPR because a couple of reasons, but somewhat because of this frame extension. It actually really prohibited that. I could have done it without the frame extension, but it also would have made that fairly long past the rear axle, longer than I wanted to. So another option is I tried a hybrid of those two, where I really just built more of like a reverse cab over design, where instead of having a cab over in the front going over the cab, it would really be at the rear here, and this would still be the bed platform up here at the top of it. But below that, I'd have this big bike garage, and that could lower down to the ground. But again, on the Fuso platform with the frame extension that EarthCruiser puts on, that really wouldn't work. So I could, though, fix this right to the subframe, which was the other idea, is I would fix this gear garage that would go all the way across the full width and all the way really to about the back wall or wherever the spare tire would go, and the spare tire would attach directly to this gear garage. And I like this a lot. In some ways I wish I'd done this. It would have saved me a whole lot of work to figure out the gear garage doors and how to cut those in, everything else that I'll certainly be doing and showing you in a future video. I came away from it because I was a little worried about how the spare tire would be supported up here and how that weight would be transferred over to the frame and do that so that it would be strong. And some of the way to just make all this really structurally strong and everything else, and make sure that I could also still ideally have access from the camper through the dinette into the gear garage should I want it. That made this a little more challenging, and also I was worried about sealing up this gear garage with it being attached to the camper here. And being my first composite camper and expedition camper I'm building, let me not do that because it just added a lot of questions I just couldn't answer at the time. And so I decided to stray away from that. And so this is what I am going with, is a gear garage that's embedded within the Total Composites box with two big doors that swing up on each side, so like bikes can go in from each side, and also the spare tire in this recess underneath the bed platform attached back here to the rear bumper, which is in this lower recess. And that's why it's got this double stepped rear departure. Is this step here is for the rear bumper, which sits in here. The rear bumper extends just past the camper on this lower portion, so the bumper will hit first before the camper does at that elevation off the ground. What it does, it gets me a little more gear space in here. You can see about another 6 inches, which is pretty substantial, and I was already tight for space for my gear that I want to be able to travel around, be able to use while traveling. And then with the spare tire up here, it becomes a really nice thing to be able to also be bumped into because it's attached to the rear bumper. Should it bump into a tree or something else to help protect the rear wall of the camper. But now I could get this camper significantly longer. In this case, it's shown here as 16 inches, but it's actually 18 inches longer because of the framing to support the spare tire and everything else that goes in there. That's going to make it roughly that depth. So that got me a lot more length inside. You can see it's really 15 feet of total interior length here, which is substantial. That's a 15-foot camper on a chassis with a total length all the way from back wall to front bumper of just over 21 feet. So being that a parking space is 20 feet long, a typical parking space, this can fit lengthwise into a normal parking space. And not only that, but widthwise, being only at just over 80 inches wide, it is about the same width as really most full-size vehicles, but about 10 inches less wide than a full-size pickup truck with the 42-inch diameter tires. So it's significantly narrower than the truck chassis I was considering. It's much shorter, and because that truck chassis with this same size camper would push the total length to about 26 feet. And so here I'm saving 5 feet in total length. I'm saving about 10 inches in width. And I'm also saving from my van that I have right now, which has a 170-inch wheelbase. I'm dropping down to a 134-inch wheelbase. So dramatically more nimble and easy to maneuver, whether it's in a parking lot or on a tight trail. One of the things here also point out, you can see this camper design has an angled front here, and I decided not to do that as it didn't make any sense. Is because it's more work to build that angle in there. It takes away some interior volume or space for storage up in this front corner. And really what I can do by making that square is now in the front of the vehicle, I can put a nice angled storage box on top of the cab. That'll create actually a better aerodynamic to help that air deflect it over the top of the camper. And also I can use that as storage and gain a lot more storage on an over cab storage box for lightweight things to go in there and gain a much better aerodynamic benefit and keep this volume inside the box and keep it easier to build. By not doing the 45s or a bit more custom on the back end or the front, it was, I believe, easier to build because I could use all standard 90-degree extrusions, which is all that are made. And so I can make all these corners 90 degrees, which is very strong. They're all going to sit and be embedded into those extrusions on all sides. And so it makes for a very nice, strong, squared off back platform here. And ultimately, my departure angle is still just as good, if not better, as I did several iterations with the spare tire hanging off a departure angle rear wall, and it just did not end up improving the departure angle at all. It actually worsened the departure angle. So it was like, why do it, right? And so that became really my design. Is ultimately what I led to is this layout here. And this, I believe, is going to work out really great. And I have so many innovations coming up that are planned for my Expedition camper that I'm building. And soon coming up, I'm going to share more about the interior build out that I'm planning, as well as the interior panels, and also building a skid plate to give this new Expedition truck a little bit of a stronger belly. Thanks for watching. Please do subscribe. See you next time.